unquote truth or knowledge or wisdom that Wikipedia tries to capture. In the same way, AI models will need to be able to generate those same things: truth, knowledge, and wisdom. And how do you align those models that they generate something that is closest to truth? There's these concerns about misinformation, all this kind of stuff that nobody can define, and it's something that we together as a human species have to define. Like, what is truth, and how to help AI systems generate that. Because one of the things language models do really well is generate convincing sounding things that can be completely wrong. And so, how do you align it to be less wrong? And part of that is the training, and part of that is the alignment, and however you do the alignment stage. And just like you said, it's a very new and a very open research problem.
Yeah. And I think that there's also a lot of questions about whether the current architecture for LLMs, as you continue scaling it, what happens? I mean, a lot of what's been exciting in the last year is that there's clearly a qualitative breakthrough where, with some of the GPT models that OpenAI put out and that others have been able to do as well, I think it reached a kind of level of quality where people are like, wow, this feels different, and like it's going to be able to be the foundation for building a lot of awesome products and experiences and value. But I think that the other realization that people have is, wow, we just made a breakthrough. Mm-hmm. If there are other breakthroughs quickly, then I think that there's the sense that maybe we're closer to general intelligence. But I think that idea is predicated on the idea that I think people believe that there's still generally a bunch of additional breakthroughs to make, and that it's we just don't know how long it's going to take to get there. And one view that some people have, this doesn't tend to be my view as much, is that simply scaling the current LLMs and getting to higher parameter count models by itself will get to something that is closer to general intelligence. But I don't know. I tend to think that there's probably more fundamental steps that need to be taken along the way there.
But still, the leaps taken with this extra alignment step is quite incredible, quite surprising to a lot of folks. And on top of that, when you start to have hundreds of millions of people potentially using a product that integrates that, you can start to see civilization transforming effects before you achieve super, quote unquote, super intelligence. It could be super transformative without being a super intelligence.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that there are going to be a lot of amazing products and value that can be created with the current level of technology. To some degree, I'm excited to work on a lot of those products over the next few years, and I think it would just create a tremendous amount of whiplash if the number of breakthroughs keeps, like if there keep on being stacked breakthroughs, because I think to some degree, industry and the world needs some time to kind of build these breakthroughs into the products and experiences that we all use so that we can actually benefit from them. But I don't know. I think that there's just a like an awesome amount of stuff to do. I mean, I think about like all of the, I don't know, small businesses or individual entrepreneurs out there who, now we're going to be able to, get help coding the things that they need to go build things, or designing the things that they need, or we'll be able to, use these models to be able to do customer support for the people that they're serving, over WhatsApp without having to, I think that's just going to be, I just think that this is all going to be super exciting. It's going to create better experiences for people and just unlock a ton of innovation and value.
So I don't know if you know, but what is it? Over 3 billion people use WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram. So any kind of AI fueled products that go into that, like we're talking about, anything with LLMs, will have a tremendous amount of impact. Do you have ideas and thoughts about possible products that might start being integrated into these platforms used by so many people?
Yeah, I think there's 3 main categories of things that we're working on. The first that I think is probably the most interesting is there's this notion of like you're going to have an assistant or an agent who you can talk to. And I think probably the biggest thing that's different about my view of how this plays out from what I see with OpenAI and Google and others is, everyone else is building like the one singular AI, right? It's like, okay, you talk to ChatGPT or you talk to Bard or you talk to Bing. And my view is that there are going to be a lot of different AIs that people are going to want to engage with, just like you want to use, a number of different apps for different things, and you have relationships with different people in your life who fill different emotional roles for you. And so I think that they're going to be people have a reason that I think you don't just want like a singular AI, and that I think is probably the biggest distinction in terms of how I think about this. And a bunch of these things I think you'll want an assistant. I mean, I mentioned a couple of these before. I think like every creator who you interact with will ultimately want some kind of AI that can proxy them and be something that their fans can interact with, or that allows them to interact with their fans. This is like the common creator problem is everyone's trying to build a community and engage with people, and they want tools to be able to amplify themselves more and be able to do that. But you only have 24 hours in a day. So I think having the ability to basically like bottle up your personality and or like give your fans information about when you're performing a concert or something like that. I mean, that I think is going to be something that's super valuable, but it's not just that, again, it's not this idea that I think people are going to want just one singular AI. I think you're going to want to interact with a lot of different entities. And then I think there's the business version of this too, which we've touched on a couple of times, which is, I think every business in the world is going to want basically an AI that it's like you have your page on Instagram or Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever, and you want to point people to an AI that people can interact with, but you want to know that AI is only going to sell your products. You don't want it, recommending your competitors' stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like there can be like just one singular AI that can answer all the questions for a person, because that AI might not actually be aligned with you as a business to really just do the best job providing support for your product. So I think that there's going to be a clear need in the market and in people's lives for there to be a bunch of these.
Part of that is figuring out the research, the technology that enables the personalization that you're talking about. So not one centralized godlike LLM, but one just a huge diversity of them that's fine-tuned to particular needs, particular styles, particular businesses, particular brands, all that kind of stuff.
And also enabling people to create them really easily for for your own business, or if you're a creator to be able to help you engage with your fans. And I think that's I think that there's a clear kind of interesting product direction here that I think is fairly unique from what any of the other big companies are taking. It also aligns well with this sort of open source approach, because again, we sort of believe in this more community oriented, more democratic approach to building out the products and technology around this. We don't think that there's going to be the one true thing. We think that there should be kind of a lot of development. So that part of things I think is going to be really interesting, and we could go probably spend a lot of time talking about that and the kind of implications of that approach being different from what others are taking. But then there's a bunch of other simpler things that I think we're also going to do. Just going back to your question around how this finds its way into like what do we build? There are going to be a lot of simpler things around. You post photos on Instagram and Facebook and in WhatsApp and Messenger, and like you want the photos to look as good as possible. So like having an AI that you can just like take a photo and then just tell it like, okay, I want to edit this thing or describe this. It's like, I think we're going to have tools that are just way better than what we've historically had on this. And that's more in the image and media generation side than the large language model side, but it all kind of plays off of advances in the same space. So there are a lot of tools that I think are just going to get built into every one of our products. I think every single thing that we do is going to basically get evolved in this direction, right? It's like in the future, if you're advertising on our services, like, do you need to make your own kind of ad creative? It's no, you'll just, you just tell us, okay, I'm a dog walker and I'm willing to walk people's dogs and help me find the right people and like create the ad unit that will perform the best, and like give an objective to the system, and it just kind of like connects you with the right people.
Well, that's a super powerful idea of generating the language, almost like rigorous A/B testing for you. That works to find the best customer for your thing. I mean, to me, advertisement, when done well, just finds a good match between a human being and a thing that will make that human being happy.
Yeah, totally.
And do that as efficiently as possible.
When it's done well, people actually like it. You know, it's I think that there's a lot of examples where it's not done well and it's annoying, and I think that that's what kind of gives it a bad rap. But yeah, and a lot of the stuff is possible today. I mean, obviously, A/B testing stuff is built into a lot of these frameworks. The thing that's new is having technology that can generate the ideas for you about what to A/B test. So I think that that's exciting. So this will just be across like everything that we're doing, right? All the metaverse stuff that we're doing, right? It's like you want to create worlds in the future, you'll just describe them and then it'll create the code for you. So
natural language becomes the interface we use for all the ways we interact with the computer, with the digital world.
More of them. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, which is what everyone can do using natural language. And with translation, you can do it in any kind of language. I mean, for the personalization, it's really, really, really interesting.
Yeah.
It unlocks so many possible things. I mean, I, for one, look forward to creating a copy of myself.
I know we talked about this last time.
But this has, since the last time, this becomes...
Now we're closer.
Much closer. Like I could literally, just having interacted with some of these language models, I can see the absurd situation where I'll have a large or a Lex language model, and I'll have to have a conversation with him about like, hey, listen, like you're just getting out of line, and having a conversation where you fine tune that thing to be a little bit more respectful or something like this. I mean, that's going to be that seems like an amazing product for businesses, for humans, just not just the assistant that's facing the individual, but the assistant that represents the individual to the public, both directions. There's basically a layer that is the AI system through which you interact with the outside world, that has humans in it. That's really interesting. And you that have social networks that connect billions of people, it seems like a heck of a large scale place to test some of this stuff out.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason why creators will want to do this is because they already have the communities on our services. Right. Yeah. And a lot of the interface for this stuff today are chat type interfaces. And between WhatsApp and Messenger, I think that those are just great ways to interact with people.
So some of this is philosophy, but do you see a near-term future where you have some of the people you're friends with are AI systems on these social networks, on Facebook, on Instagram, even on WhatsApp, having conversations where some heterogeneous, some is human, some is AI?
I think we'll get to that. And if only just empirically looking at, and Microsoft released this thing called Xiaoice several years ago in China, and it was a pre-LLM chatbot technology so it was a lot simpler than what's possible today. And I think it was like tens of millions of people were using this and just, really, became quite attached and built relationships with it. And I think that there's services today like Replica where, people are doing things like that. And so I think that there's certainly, needs for companionship that people have, older people, and I think most people probably don't have as many friends as they would like to have, right? If you look at, there's some interesting demographic studies around that, like the average person has the number of close friends that they have is fewer today than it was 15 years ago. And I mean, that gets to like, this is like the core thing that
Mhm.
that I think about in terms of, building services that help connect people. So I think you'll get tools that help people connect with each other are going to be, the primary thing that we want to do. So you can imagine, AI assistants that, just do a better job of reminding you when it's your friend's birthday and how you could celebrate them, right? It's like right now we have like the little box in the corner of the website that tells you whose birthday it is and stuff like that. But it's, but at some level, you don't just want to like send everyone a note that's the same note saying happy birthday with an emoji,
Mhm.
right? So having something that's more of an, a social assistant in that sense, and like that can, update you on what's going on in their life and like how you can reach out to them effectively, help you be a better friend. I think that's something that's super powerful too. But yeah, beyond that, and there are all these different flavors of kind of personal AIs that I think could exist. So I think an assistant is sort of the kind of simplest one to wrap your head around, but I think like a mentor or a life coach, someone who can give you advice, who's maybe like a bit of a cheerleader who can help pick you up through all the challenges that inevitably we all go through on a daily basis.
Mhm.
I think that there's probably some role for something like that, and then all the way you can probably just go through a lot of the different type of kind of functional relationships that people have in their life, and I would bet that there will be companies out there that take a crack at a lot of these things. So I don't know. I think it's part of the interesting innovation that's going to exist is that there's certainly a lot, like education tutors,
Mhm.
right? It's like, I mean, I just look at my kids learning to code, and they love it, but it's like they get stuck on a question and they have to wait till like I can help answer it, right? Or someone else who they know can help answer the question in the future. There will be like a coding assistant that they have that
Mhm.
is like designed to, be perfect for teaching a 5 and a 7-year-old how to code. And they'll just be able to ask questions all the time. And, it'll be extremely patient. It's never going to get annoyed at them. Right.
Mhm.
Um, I think that like there are all these different kind of relationships or functional relationships that we have in our lives that are really interesting. And I think one of the big questions is like, okay, is this all going to just get bucketed into one singular AI? I don't think so.
Do you think about this? Is actually a question from Reddit. What the long-term effects of human communication when people can talk with, in quotes, talk with others through a chatbot that augments their language automatically, rather than developing social skills by making mistakes and learning. Uh, will people just communicate by grunts in a generation? Do you think about long-term effects at scale, the integration of AI in our social interaction?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's mostly good. I mean that question was sort of framed in a negative way, but I mean, we were talking before about language models helping you communicate with it was like language translation
Mhm.
helping you communicate with people who don't speak your language. I mean, at some level, what all this social technology is doing is helping people um, express themselves better to people in situations where they would otherwise have a hard time doing that. So
Mhm.
part of it might be okay because you speak a language that I don't know. That's a pretty basic one that I don't think people are going to look at that and say it's sad that we have the capacity to do that because I should have just learned your language, right? I mean that's a pretty high bar. But overall, I'd say there are all these impediments, and language is an imperfect way for people to express thoughts and ideas. It's one of the best that we have. We have that, and we have art, we have code,
But
but
language
it's
is also a mapping of the way you think, the way you see the world, who you are. And one of the applications, I've recently talked to a person who's actually a jiu-jitsu instructor. He said that when he emails parents about their son and daughter, that they can improve their discipline in class and so on, he often finds that he's comes off a bit of more of an asshole than he would like. So he uses GPT to translate his original email into a nicer email, the
we
more
hear this all the
polite one.
time. We hear this all the time. A lot of creators on our services tell us that one of the most stressful things is basically negotiating deals with brands and stuff, like the business side of it, because they're like, I mean, they do their thing, right? And the creators, they're excellent at what they do, and they just want to connect with their community. But then they get really stressed. They go into their DMs and they see some brand wants to do something with them, and they don't quite know how to negotiate or how to push back respectfully. And so I think building a tool that can actually allow them to do that well is one simple thing that I think is just like an interesting thing that we've heard from a bunch of people that they'd be interested in. But I'm going back to the broader idea. I don't know. I mean, I just Priscilla and I just had our third daughter.
Congratulations,
couple months ago. Thank you. Thanks. It's and it's like one of the saddest things in the world is like seeing your baby cry, right? But like it's like why is that, right? It's like, well, because babies don't generally have much capacity to tell you what they care about otherwise, right? And it's not actually just babies, right? It's my 5-year-old daughter cries too because she sometimes has a hard time expressing, what matters to her. And then I was thinking about that, and it's like, well, actually, a lot of adults get very frustrated too because they have a hard time expressing things in a way that, going back to some of the early themes, that maybe is something that was a mistake, or maybe they have pride or something. Like all these things get in the way. So I don't know. I think that all these different technologies that can help us navigate the social complexity and actually be able to better express what we're feeling and thinking, I think that's generally all good. And there are all these concerns, like, okay, are people going to have worse memories because you have Google to look things up? And I think in general, a generation later, you don't look back and lament that. I think it's just like, wow, we have so much more capacity to do so much more now. And I think that that'll be the case here too.
You can allocate those cognitive capabilities to like deeper, more nuanced thought.
Yeah.
But it's change. So with just like with Google search, the addition of language models, large language models, you basically don't have to remember nearly as much. Just like with Stack Overflow for programming, now that these language models can generate code right there. I mean, I find that I write like maybe 80%, 90% of the code I write is now generated first and then edited. I mean, so you don't have to remember how to write specifics of different functions.
Oh, but that's great. And it's not just the specific coding. I mean, in the context of a large company like this, I think before an engineer can sit down to code, they first need to figure out all of the libraries and dependencies that tens of thousands of people have written before them.
Yep.
And one of the things that I'm excited about that we're working on is it's not just tools that help engineers code. It's tools that can help summarize the whole knowledge base and help people be able to navigate all the internal information. I mean, I think that's in the experiments that I've done with this stuff. I mean, that's on the public stuff. You just ask one of these models to build you a script that does anything, and it basically already understands what the best libraries are to do that thing and pulls them in automatically. I think that's super powerful. That was always the most annoying part of coding, was that you had to spend all this time actually figuring out what the resources were that you were supposed to import before you could actually start building the thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's, of course, the flip side of that, I think for the most part is positive, but the flip side is if you outsource that thinking to an AI model, you might miss nuanced mistakes and bugs. You lose the skill to find those bugs. And those bugs might be, the code looks very convincingly right, but it's actually wrong in a very subtle way. But that's the trade-off that we face as human civilization when we build more and more powerful tools. When we stand on the shoulders of taller and taller giants, we could do more, but then we forget how to do all the stuff that they did. It's a weird trade-off.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I think it is very valuable in your life to be able to do basic things too.
Do you worry about some of the concerns of bots being present on social networks? More and more human-like bots that are not necessarily trying to do a good thing, or they might be explicitly trying to do a bad thing, like phishing scams,
Yeah.
like social engineering, all that kind of stuff, which has always been a very difficult problem for
Yeah.
social networks, but now it's becoming almost a more and more difficult problem.
Well, I think that there's a few different parts of this. So one is there are all these harms that we need to basically fight against and prevent, and that's been a lot of our focus over the last 5 or 7 years is basically ramping up very sophisticated AI systems, not generative AI systems, more kind of classical AI systems, to be able to categorize and classify and identify. Okay, this post looks like it's promoting terrorism. This one is, like exploiting children. This one is looks like it might be trying to incite violence. This one's an intellectual property violation. So there's like it's like 18 different categories of violating kind of harmful content that we've had to build specific systems to be able to track. And
Yeah.
I think it's certainly the case that advances in generative AI will test those. But at least so far, it's been the case, and I'm optimistic that it will continue to be the case, that we will be able to bring more computing power to bear to have even stronger AIs that can help defend against those things. So we've had to deal with some adversarial issues before, right? For some things like hate speech, it's like people aren't generally getting a lot more sophisticated. Like the average person, who, let's say, if someone's saying some kind of racist thing, right? It's like they're not necessarily getting more sophisticated at being racist, right? It's okay. So that the system can just find. But then there's other adversaries who actually are very sophisticated, like nation states doing things. And, we find, whether it's Russia or, just different countries that are basically standing up these networks of bots or inauthentic accounts is what we call them, because they're not necessarily bots. That some of them could actually be real people who are kind of masquerading as other people, but they're acting in a coordinated way. And some of that behavior has gotten very sophisticated and it's very adversarial. So they, each iteration, every time we find something and stop them, they kind of evolve their behavior. They don't just pack up their bags and go home and say, okay, we're not going to try. At some point they might decide doing it on Meta's services is not worth it. They'll go do it on someone else if it's easier to do it in another place. But we have a fair amount of experience dealing with even those kind of adversarial attacks where they just keep on getting better and better. And I do think that as long as we can keep on putting more compute power against it, and if we're kind of one of the leaders in developing some of these AI models, I'm quite optimistic that we're going to be able to keep on pushing against the kind of normal categories of harm that you talk about: fraud, scams, spam, IP violations, things like that.
What about like creating narratives and controversy? To me, it's kind of amazing how a small collection of what did you say, inauthentic accounts? So it could be bots, but
I mean, we have sort of this funny name for it, but we call it coordinated inauthentic behavior.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible how a small collection of folks can create narratives, create stories. Especially if they're viral. So especially if they have an element that can catalyze the virality of the narrative.
Yeah, and I think the question is you have to be, I think, very specific about what is bad about it, right? Because I think a set of people coming together or organically bouncing ideas off each other and a narrative comes out of that is not necessarily a bad thing by itself if it's kind of authentic and organic. Mm-hmm. That's like a lot of what happens in how culture gets created and how art gets created and a lot of good stuff. So that's why we've kind of focused on this sense of coordinated inauthentic behavior. So it's like if you have a network of, whether it's bots, some people masquerading as different accounts, but you have kind of someone pulling the strings behind it, and trying to kind of act as if this is a more organic set of behavior, but really it's not. It's just like one coordinated thing. That seems problematic to me, right? I mean, I don't think people should be able to have coordinated networks and not disclose it as such. But that again, we've been able to deploy pretty sophisticated AI and counterterrorism groups and things like that to be able to identify a fair number of these coordinated and authentic networks of accounts and take them down. We continue to do that, and I think we've it's one thing that if you'd told me 20 years ago, it's like, all right, you're starting this website to help people connect at a college, and in the future you're going to be part of your organization is going to be a counterterrorism organization with AI to find coordinated and authentic. I would have thought that was pretty wild, but it's but no, I think that's part of where we are. But look, I think that these questions that you're pushing on now, this is actually where I'd guess most of the challenge around AI will be for the foreseeable future. I think that there's a lot of debate around things like, is this going to create existential risk to humanity? And I think that those are very hard things to disprove one way or another. My own intuition is that the point at which we become close to superintelligence is it's just really unclear to me that the current technology is gonna get there without another set of significant advances. But that doesn't mean that there's no danger. I think the danger is basically amplifying the kind of known set of harms that people or sets of accounts can do, and we just need to make sure that we really focus on basically doing that as well as possible. So that's definitely a big focus for me.
Well, you can basically use large language models as an assistant of how to cause harm on social networks. So you can ask it a question. Meta has very impressive, coordinated, inauthentic account fighting capabilities. How do I do the coordinated, inauthentic account creation where Meta doesn't detect it? Like literally ask that question. and basically there's this kind of part of it. I mean, that's what OpenAI showed, that they're concerned with those questions. Perhaps you can comment on your approach to it, how to do a kind of moderation on the output of those models, that it can't be used to help you coordinate harm in all the full definition of what the harm means.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the fine tuning and the alignment training that we do is basically, when we ship AIs across our products, a lot of what we're trying to make sure is that if you can't ask it to help you commit a crime, right? It's so I think training it to kind of understand that, and it's not like any of these systems are ever going to be 100% perfect, but just making it so that this isn't an easier way to go about doing something bad than the next best alternative, right? I mean, people still have Google, right? You still have search engines, so the information is out there, and for these, what we see is like for nation states or these actors that are trying to pull off these large, coordinated and authentic networks to kind of influence different things. At some point, when we would just make it very difficult, they do just try to use other services instead, right? It's just like, if you can make it more expensive for them to do it on your service, then kind of people go elsewhere. And I think that's the bar, right? It's like, it's not like, okay, are you ever going to be perfect at finding every adversary who tries to attack you? You try to get as close to that as possible, but I think really, kind of economically, what you're just trying to do is make it so that it's just inefficient for them to go after that.
But there's also complicated questions of what is and isn't harm, what is and isn't misinformation. So this
Absolutely.
is one of the things that Wikipedia has also tried to face. I remember asking GPT about whether the virus leaked from a lab or not, and the answer provided was a very nuanced one and a well-cited one, almost dare I say, well thought out one, balanced. I would hate for that nuance to be lost through the process of moderation. Wikipedia does a good job on that particular thing too. But from pressures from governments and institutions, it's, you could see some of that nuance and depth of information, facts, and wisdom be lost.
Absolutely.
And that's a scary thing. Some of the magic, some of the edges, the rough edges might be lost in the process of moderation of AI systems. So how do you get that right?
I really agree with what you're pushing on. I mean, the core, I think the core shape of the problem is that there are some harms that I think everyone agrees are bad, right? So, you know, sexual exploitation of children, right? Like you're not going to get many people who think that that type of thing should be allowed on any service, right? And that's something that we face and try to push off the, as much as possible today. Terrorism, um, inciting violence, right? It's like we went through a bunch of these types of harms before. But then I do think that you get to a set of harms where there is more social debate around it. Mm-hmm. So misinformation, I think, has been a really tricky one because there are things that are kind of obviously false, right? That are maybe factual, but may not be harmful. So it's like, all right, are you going to censor someone for just being wrong? It's, if there's no kind of harm implication of what they're doing, I think there's a bunch of real kind of issues and challenges there. But then I think that there are other places where it is, just take some of the stuff around COVID earlier on in the pandemic, where there were, real health implications, but there hadn't been time to fully vet a bunch of the scientific assumptions. And, unfortunately, I think a lot of the kind of establishment on that, kind of waffled on a bunch of facts and, asked for a bunch of things to be censored that in retrospect ended up being, more debatable or true. And that stuff is really tough, right? And really undermines trust in that. And so I do think that the questions around how to manage that are very nuanced. The way that I try to think about it is that it goes, I think it's best to generally boil things down to the harms that people agree on. So when you think about, is something misinformation or not, I think often the more salient bit is this going to potentially lead to physical harm for someone, and kind of think about it in that sense. And then beyond that, I think people just have different preferences on how they want things to be flagged for them. I think a bunch of people would prefer to kind of have a flag on something that says, hey, a fact checker thinks that this might be false. Or I think Twitter's community notes implementation is quite good on this. But again, it's the same type of thing. It's like just kind of discretionarily adding a flag because it makes the user experience better. Mm-hmm. But it's not, trying to take down the information or not. I think that you want to reserve the kind of censorship of content to things that are of known categories that people generally agree are bad.
Yeah, but there's so many things, especially with the pandemic, but there's other topics where there's just deep disagreement fueled by politics about what is and isn't harmful. There's just the degree to which the virus is harmful and the degree to which the vaccines that respond to the virus are harmful. There's almost like a political divide around that. And so how do you make decisions about that where half the country in the United States or some large fraction of the world has very different views from another part of the world? Is there a way for really, Meta to stay out of the moderation of this?
I think it's very difficult to just abstain, but I think we should be clear about which of these things are actual safety concerns and which ones are a matter of preference in terms of how people want information flagged. Right. So we did recently introduce something that allows people to have fact checking not affect the distribution of what shows up in their product. So, okay, a bunch of people don't trust who the fact checkers are. All right, well, you can turn that off if you want. But if the content violates some policy, like it's inciting violence or something like that, it's still not going to be allowed. So I think that you want to honor people's preferences on that as much as possible. But look, I mean, this is really difficult stuff. I think it's really hard to know where to draw the line on what is fact and what is opinion, because the nature of science is that nothing is ever 100% known for certain. You can disprove certain things, but you're constantly testing new hypotheses and scrutinizing frameworks that have been long held, and every once in a while you throw out something that was working for a very long period of time, and it's very difficult. But I think that just because it's very hard and just because they're edge cases doesn't mean that you should not try to give people what they're looking for as well.
Let me ask about something you faced in terms of moderation is pressure from different sources, pressure from governments. I want to ask a question, how to withstand that pressure for a world where AI moderation starts becoming a thing too. So what's Meta's approach to resist the pressure from governments and other interest groups in terms of what to moderate and not?
I don't know that there's like a one size fits all answer to that. I mean, I think we basically have the principles around, we want to allow people to express as much as possible, but we have developed clear categories of things that we think are wrong, that we don't want on our services, and we build tools to try to moderate those. So then the question is, okay, what do you do when a government says that they don't want something on the service? And I think we have a bunch of principles around how we deal with that. Because on the one hand, if there's a democratically elected government and people around the world just have different values in different places, then should we as a California-based company tell them that something that they have decided is unacceptable, actually, like, that we need to be able to express that? I mean, I think that there's a certain amount of hubris in that. But then I think that there are other cases where it's like a little more autocratic, and you have the dictator leader who's just trying to crack down on dissent, and the people in a country are really not aligned with that, and it's not necessarily against their culture, but the person who's leading it is just trying to push in a certain direction. These are very complex questions, but I think so. It's difficult to have a one size fits all approach to it. But in general, we're pretty active in kind of advocating and pushing back on requests to take things down. But honestly, the thing that I think a request to censor things is one thing, and that's obviously bad. But where we draw a much harder line is on requests for access to information, right? Because if you get told that you can't say something, I mean, that's bad, right? I mean, that is obviously it violates your sense and freedom of expression at some level. But a government getting access to data in a way that seems like it would be unlawful in our country, exposes people to real physical harm, and that's something that in general we take very seriously. And then so that flows through like all of our policies in a lot of ways, right? It's by the time you're actually like litigating with a government or pushing back on them, that's pretty late in the funnel. I'd say a bunch of this stuff starts a lot higher up in the decision of where do we put data centers. Then there are a lot of countries where we may have a lot of people using the service in a place. It might be good for the service in some ways. Good for those people if we could reduce the latency by having a data center nearby them. But for whatever reason, we just feel like, hey, this government does not have a good track record on basically not trying to get access to people's data. And at the end of the day, I mean, if you put a data center in a country and the government wants to get access to people's data, then they do at the end of the day have the option of having people show up with guns and taking it by force. So I think that there's like a lot of decisions that go into like how you architect the systems years in advance of these actual confrontations that end up being really important.
So you put the protection of people's data as a very, very high priority. But
That I think there are more harms that I think can be associated with that, and I think that ends up being a more critical thing to defend against governments than Whereas if another government has a different view of what should be acceptable speech in their country, especially if it's a democratically elected government, and then I think that there's a certain amount of deference that you should have to that.
So that's speaking more to the direct harm that's possible when you give governments access to data. But if we look at the United States, to the more nuanced kind of pressure to censor, not even order to censor, but pressure to censor from political entities, which has kind of received quite a bit of attention in the United States. Maybe one way to ask that question is, if you've seen the Twitter files, what have you learned from the kind of pressure from U.S. government agencies that was seen in Twitter files? And what do you do with that kind of pressure?
I mean, I've seen it. It's really hard from the outside to know exactly what happened in each of these cases. We've obviously been in a bunch of our own cases where where agencies or different folks will just say, hey, here's a threat that we're aware of. You should be aware of this too. It's not really pressure as much as it is just, flagging something that our security systems should be on alert about. I get how some people could think of it as that, but at the end of the day, it's our call on how to handle that. But I mean, I just, in terms of running these services, want to have access to as much information about what people think that adversaries might be trying to do as possible.
Wait, so you don't feel like there would be consequences if, anybody, the CIA, the FBI, a political party, the Democrats or the Republicans, of high, powerful political figures write emails, you don't feel pressure from suggestions?
I guess what I'd say is there's so much pressure from all sides that I'm not sure that any specific thing that someone says is really adding that much more to the mix. It's I mean, there are obviously a lot of people who think that that we should be censoring more content, or there are a lot of people who think we should be censoring less content. There are, as you say, all kinds of different groups that are involved in these debates, right? So there's the kind of elected officials and politicians themselves. There's the agencies, but there's the media. There's activist groups. There's this is not a U.S. specific thing. There are groups all over the world and kind of all in every country that bring different values. So it's just a very active debate, and I understand it, right? I mean, these are these kind of questions get to really some of the most important social debates that are being had. So it gets back to the question of truth, because for a lot of these things, they haven't yet been hardened into a single truth, and society's sort of trying to hash out what what we think, right, on certain issues. Maybe in a few hundred years, everyone will look back and say, "Hey, no, wasn't it obvious that it should have been this?" But no, we're kind of in that meat grinder now, and and working through that. So, these are all very complicated, and some people raise concerns in good faith and just say, "Hey, this is something that I want to flag for you to think about." Certain people, I certainly think, like, come at things with somewhat of a more kind of punitive or vengeful view of I want you to do this thing, and if you don't, then I'm going to try to make your life difficult in a lot of other ways. But I don't know. There's just this is one of the most pressurized debates, I think, in society. So I just think that there are so many people and different forces that are trying to apply pressure from different sides that it's I don't think you can make decisions based on trying to make people happy. I think you just have to do what you think is the right balance and accept that people are going to be upset no matter where you come out on that.
Yeah, I like that pressurized debate. So how has your view of the freedom of speech evolved over the years?
Um,
And now with AI, where the freedom might apply to them, not just to the humans, but to the personalized agents, as you've spoken about them.
so yeah, I mean, I've probably gotten a somewhat more nuanced view just because I think that there are, I come at this, I'm obviously very pro freedom of expression, right? I don't think you build a service like this that gives people tools to express themselves unless you think that people expressing themselves at scale is a good thing, right? So I didn't get into this to like try to prevent people from expressing anything. I like want to give people tools so they can express as much as possible. And then I think it's become clear that there are certain categories of things that we've talked about that I think almost everyone accepts are bad and that no one wants and that are illegal, even in countries like the US where, you have the First Amendment that's very protective of enabling speech. It's like you're still not allowed to, do things that are going to immediately incite violence or, violate people's intellectual property or things like that. So there are those, but then there's also a very active core of just active disagreements in society where some people may think that something is true or false. The other side might think it's the opposite or just unsettled, right? And those are some of the most difficult to kind of handle, like we've talked about. But one of the lessons that I feel like I've learned is that a lot of times when you can, the best way to handle this stuff more practically is not in terms of answering the question of should this be allowed, but just like what is the best way to deal with someone being a jerk? Is the person basically just having a like repeat behavior of like causing a lot of issues? So looking at it more at that level.
And its effect on the broader communities, health of the community, health of the
Yeah.
state. It's tricky though, because like, how do you know there could be people that have a very controversial viewpoint that turns out to have a positive long-term effect on the health of the community because it challenges the community to
That's
think.
true. Absolutely.
It's
Yeah, no, I think you want to be careful about that. I'm not sure I'm expressing this very, very clearly. Because I certainly agree with your point there. And my point isn't that we should not have people on our services that are being controversial. That's certainly not what I mean to say. It's that often I think it's not just looking at a specific example of speech that it's most effective to handle this stuff. And I think often you don't want to make specific binary decisions of kind of this is allowed or this isn't. I mean, we talked about, it's fact checking or Twitter's community voices thing. I think that's another good example. It's like, it's not a question of is this allowed or not? It's just a question of adding more context to the thing. And I think that that's helpful. So in the context of AI, which is what you were asking about, I think there are lots of ways that an AI can be helpful. With an AI, it's less about censorship, right? Because it's more about what is the most productive answer to a question. There was one case study that I was reviewing with the team. Is someone asked, "Can you explain to me how to 3D print a gun?"
Mm-hmm.
And one proposed response is like, "No, I can't talk about that." Right? It's like basically just like shut it down immediately. Mm-hmm. Which I think is some of what you see. It's like, as a large language model, I'm not allowed to talk about, whatever. But there's another response, which is like, hey, I don't think that's a good idea. In a lot of countries, including the US, 3D printing guns is illegal or kind of whatever the factual thing is. And I was like, okay, that's actually a respectful and informative answer. And, I may have not known that specific thing. And so there are different ways to handle this that I think kind of you can either assume good intent, like maybe the person didn't know and I'm just going to help educate them, or you could like kind of come at it as like, no, I need to shut this thing down immediately. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like I just am not going to talk about this. Like, and there may be times where you need to do that, but I actually think having a somewhat more informative approach where you generally assume good intent from people is probably a better balance to be on as many things as you can be. You're not going to be able to do that for everything, but that you're kind of asking about how I approach this, and I'm thinking about this and as it relates to AI, and I think that's a big difference in kind of how to handle sensitive content across these different modes.
I have to ask, there's rumors you might be working on a social network that's text-based. That might be a competitor to Twitter, codenamed P92. Is there something you could say about those rumors?
There is a project. I've always thought that sort of a text-based kind of information utility is just a really important thing to society. And for whatever reason, I feel like Twitter has not lived up to what I would have thought its full potential should be. And I think that the current, I think Elon thinks that, right? And that's probably one of the reasons why he bought it. And I do think that there are ways to consider alternative approaches to this. And one that I think is potentially interesting is this open and federated approach, where you're seeing with Mastodon. I mean, you're seeing that a little bit with Blue Sky. And I think that it's possible that something that melds some of those ideas with the graph and identity system that people have already cultivated on Instagram could be a kind of very welcome contribution to that space. But I don't know, we work on a lot of things all the time though too. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. I mean, we have projects that explore a lot of different things, and this is certainly one that I think could be interesting. But
so what's the the launch date of that again? Or
yeah,
what's the official website? And
well, we don't have that yet.
Oh, okay.
But
All right. All right.
And look, I mean, I don't know exactly how this is going to turn out. I mean, what I can say is, yeah, there's some people working on this, right? I think that there's something there that's interesting to explore.
So if you look at, it'd be interesting just to ask this question and throw Twitter into the mix, at the landscape of social networks, that is Facebook, that is Instagram, that is WhatsApp, and then think of a text-based social network. When you look at that landscape, what are the interesting differences to you? Why do we have these different flavors? And what are the needs? What are the use cases? What are the products? What is the aspect of them that create a fulfilling human experience and a connection between humans that is somehow distinct?
Well, I think text is very accessible for people to transmit ideas and to have back and forth exchanges. So it, I think, ends up being a good format for discussion. In a lot of ways, uniquely good, right? If you look at some of the other formats or other networks that have focused on one type of content, like TikTok is obviously huge, right? And there are comments on TikTok, but I think the architecture of the service is very clearly that you have the video is the primary thing, and there's comments after that. But I think one of the unique pieces of having text-based comments, like content, is that the comments can also be first class.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it so that conversations can just filter and fork into all these different directions, and in a way that can be super useful. So I think that there's a lot of things that are really awesome about the experience. It just always struck me, I always thought that Twitter should have 1 billion people using it, or whatever the thing is that that basically ends up being in that space. And for whatever combination of reasons, again, these companies are complex organisms, and it's very hard to diagnose this stuff from the outside.
Why doesn't a text-based comment as a first citizen-based social network have 1 billion users?
Well, I just think it's hard to build these companies. So it's it's not that every idea automatically goes and gets 1 billion people. It's just that I think that idea, coupled with good execution, should get there. But I mean, look, we hit certain thresholds over time where we kind of plateaued early on, and it wasn't clear that we were ever going to reach 100 million people on Facebook. And then we got really good at dialing in internationalization and helping the service grow in different countries. And and that was like a whole competence that we needed to develop, and helping people basically spread the service to their friends. That was one of the things. Once we got very good at that, that was one of the things that made me feel like, hey, if Instagram joined us early on, then I felt like we could help grow that quickly. And same with WhatsApp. And I think that that's sort of been a core competence that we've developed and been able to execute on. And others have too, right? I mean, ByteDance obviously have done a very good job with TikTok and have reached more than 1 billion people there. But it's certainly not automatic, right? I think you need a certain level of execution to basically get there. And I think for whatever reason, I think Twitter has this great idea and sort of magic in the service, but they just haven't kind of cracked that piece yet. And I think that that's made it so that you're seeing all these other things, whether it's Mastodon or Blue Sky, that I think are maybe just different cuts at the same thing. But I think through the last generation of social media overall, one of the interesting experiments that I think should get run at larger scale is what happens if there's somewhat more decentralized control, and if it's the stack is more open throughout. And I've just been pretty fascinated by that and seeing how that works. To some degree, end-to-end encryption on WhatsApp, and as we bring it to other services, provides an element of it because it pushes the service really out to the edges. I mean, the server part of this that we run for WhatsApp is relatively very thin compared to what we do on Facebook or Instagram. And much more of the complexity is, in how the apps kind of negotiate with each other to pass information in a fully end-to-end encrypted way. But I don't know. I think that is a good model. I think it puts more power in individuals' hands, and there are a lot of benefits of it if you can make it happen. Again, this is all like pretty speculative. I mean, I think that it's hard from the outside to know why anything does or doesn't work until you kind of take a run at it. And so I think it's kind of an interesting thing to experiment with, but I don't really know where this one's going to go.
So since we were talking about Twitter, Elon Musk had what I think a few harsh words that I wish he didn't say.